Gute Sichis Chelek Yud Ches, Korach Gimel, Lili Nishmis Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Kaltman, a fascinating insight into the idea of Achdus. What creates Achdus? Is it equality or diversity that makes up true Achdus? And obviously this is going to be discussed in the context of the story of Korach, who wants Achdus but goes about it in the wrong way. In der Machlekes auf Moshe v'Aaron, seinen Korach war das bestraft geworden mit zwei Einschen. We find two punishments that Korach and his people received. Eis kol ha'adam asher leKorach und Dasan v'Aviram seinen Nivle geworden. The people around Korach, including Dasan and Aviram, were swallowed up by Yerdu Heim v'chol asher lehem chaim she'ela. They and everything that they had descended alive into the grave. And then there were the 250 people that brought the Ketores, they were burned. Says Yodua as the ancient was kumen melamaila and mein von der Maisa ha'aveda. Was der Mensch tut? We know that the punishment or the consequences for an aveda are similar to the crime that the person did. Ubelashon Chazal, b'midah sh'adam moeded ba moeded in loy. As Chazal say, the way the person measures, that's what's measured back to him. In other words, the way the person conducts himself, that is what's given back to him. The Shalah brings two opinions as to how punishments work in Yiddishkeit. One is that a punishment is a consequence. For example, if somebody jumps off of a building and dies on the bottom, it's not so much of a punishment as much as a consequence. If this is, you jump off, you land on the bottom, there's another opinion that a punishment is something decided by the Eibishter. It's not necessarily a consequence, a natural consequence of what you've done. But even according to that opinion, there's going to be a connection between the punishment and the thing that the person did. And certainly, according to the opinion, also brought in the Shalah, that punishment and reward, for that matter, are a natural outcome, a natural consequence of the action that the person took, then certainly there has to be a connection between his deed and the punishment. Davon verstehen. Was war das Scheiches wie his damos ist da in die Einschim von Zreife und Belia zu sehr Chetub Gam, sehr Machlekes of Moshe v'Aaretz. We have to understand what connection is there between, what comparison is there between the punishments, either of burning or of being swallowed up in the ground, and the sin, the crime that was done, which was the rebellion against Moshe and Aaron. So Tziv Beis is going to suggest an answer and going to refute it. When it gets to maybe we can explain this very simply. As also Moshe has colonized in Belubai, that in place of the argument that Korach v'Adasei had against the appointments of Moshe, saying that Moshe did everything on his own, and their goal was through this rebellion to lift themselves up to become koyanim. His nasos, it was a problem of arrogance. So they were lowered down they were lowered into the ground. And the punishment was the ultimate descent. So instead of being lifted up, which is what they wanted, they were punished by the descent. So seemingly, the punishment fits very well. We can give a similar answer with regards to the punishment of Sreifa, of being burned. From Pashtus Aksuvim is mashma, as the Einish Sreifa is gekommen to leave their Pula von Akravas Akteres. This is verbunden mit Eish. If you follow the basic story of the Psukim, Moshe Rabbeinu has told them that if they want to know who is the actual chosen kohen by the Eidush or Kohen Gadol, they should come and they should be makter Ketores, and the Ketores that the Eidush chooses, they'll know that he is the one that the Eidush chose. Now, how do you do Ketores? With fire. We bald as das is given an Eish Zara. And since this was a foreign fire, a fire that they were not supposed to bring because they were not Kohanim, the fire is ve'eish yotzameis Hashem v'ateichel. So therefore they were punished with fire. They sinned with fire by bringing ketores that they weren't allowed to, and they were punished with fire. That the fire came out and consumed them. So l'chayra, we could answer that in the punishment of blia, of being swallowed up in the ground, they were lowered into the ground, which is the opposite of what they wanted to accomplish, which was to lift themselves up. And with regards to Sreifa, they sinned with burning and with fire, and therefore they were punished with fire. Aber es ist nicht ganz verständlich, but this doesn't truly clarify the situation. Because the Ketores of the Moshe geheißen makriv sein. The Ketores wasn't their actual sin. Wasn't their Ketores, they were doing it because Moshe told them to do it. Hein emes das hat gedarft herausbringen den Bilder von Ha'isha sheyivchar Hashem hu HaKadosh. It's true that the reason for it was to clarify who is the person that the Eibishter chose. V'kulchem oivdim, and everyone else is going to die. But this wasn't really connected to their primary sin, which was their rebellion. As the pasuk it says, they sinned with their souls, but das means they sinned with their souls by rebelling against the Eibishter. Which means that their main sin, their main crime was their rebellion against the Eibishter. Und noch mehr, der Eibishter hat geheißen, dass man soll von sehr machtes machen rikuei pachim tzipui lamizbeach. The Eibishter commanded to take the pans, the frying pans that they use for their ketores, and to make it thin as an overlay for the mizbeach. It was an ois, it was a sign for remembrance that these were the ones who rebelled against the Kohuna. So if you're going to say that they were burned because they brought the fire of Ketores, then the sign is missing something, because the sign doesn't say anything about the machlokes. If the frying pans are being are coating the mizbeach to remind us of the machlokes, how does it work? It reminds us of the fact that they sinned with fire. It doesn't remind us of the machlokes, unless there's something connected in the Sreifa to the machlokes. Musman sagen, as der einisch von nisrefu gufa hat a shayches zum zikaron sheyemar elu hayu meyeson shenechleku ala kohuna. That the punishment of nisrefu, the burning, is actually connected to the fact that they were the ones who rebelled against the Kohuna. We're back to our original question. What is the connection between the fire and the rebellion against the Kohuna? And a similar thing we can say with regards to the punishment of Blia, of being swallowed up in the ground. The way we answered the question in the beginning of Seif Beis, they wanted to be lifted up, raised up. It was a sin of arrogance, and therefore they were lowered down into the ground. So the ultimate emphasis here is on the lowering, on the descent. In Einish HaYirida, so the punishment was to be lowered in contrast to their sin of lifting themselves up. But if you look at the psukim and the medrashim of Chazal, it seems to imply as Iker ha'einish is bashtan in the prat von Blia. It wasn't so much about the fact that they were lowered into the ground as much as the fact that they were swallowed up into the ground. Chazal say, we call these people bluim, the swallowed up ones. What defines them, not the yerdim, not that they were lowered into the ground, but the fact that they were swallowed. So even though the fact that they were lowered into the ground might be connected to the fact that they wanted to lift themselves up, but the fact that they were swallowed up into the ground, how does that connect to their sin, to their crime of rebelling against Moshe and Aaron? So this is our question. This is the main question that we're going to have today. What is the connection between the Einshim, the punishments of Sreifa and Blia, being burned and being swallowed, to their sin of Machlokes, rebelling against Moshe and Aaron? In Seif Gimel, we're going to ask another question. We have another question. The Medrash says, as Korach loka yeser mikulam. Korach was punished more than everyone else. Shenisraf v'nivla. He had both. He was burned and he was swallowed up into the ground. Why was he punished with both of these things? Because if he was burned and not swallowed up in the ground, then those who were swallowed up would complain and say, Korach is the one who brought this all about. This whole trouble was brought about by Korach. They are being swallowed up. Korach is being saved. And if he was swallowed up and not burned, then the ones who were burned would complain and say, Korach is the one who brought about all of this punishment, and they are being burned, and he's being saved. Therefore, Korach had to be punished with both deaths. But the question is, even if Korach was only punished with one death, even if we'll accept that the ones who received the punishment that Korach didn't get will feel that they had the worst of the two punishments, they still can't argue that Korach was saved. He's still being punished with death. So what does it mean? How could they say he's being saved? Even if, let's say, Korach was just burned, and the people who were swallowed up felt that swallowed up was a worse punishment, and Korach deserved to be swallowed more than he deserved to be burned. How could they use the words "v'hu nitzel"? He was saved. He wasn't saved. He wasn't saved. He died. So there's an emphasis here on the words "v'hu nitzel," which we have to understand. So number one, you have to understand the einish of Sreifa and Blia, how it connects to the machlekes of Korach. Number two, what does it mean that had Korach received only one punishment and not the other, he would have been considered nitzel, saved. So in order to understand the punishment and what happened to Korach, we have to first understand what was the underlying goal of Korach's machlekes. Korach's taine is given kichol ha'eda kulam kedoshim ubeseicham Hashem umadua tisnasu akal Hashem. Korach's argument, as the pasuk says, the whole congregation is all holy. Hashem is amongst all of us. Why should you raise yourselves up over the rest of the Eibishter's congregation, the Eibishter's people? Das heißt, hat gewollt, also sollen nicht sein keine Unterschiede zwischen Juden. Korach wanted no distinctions and no differences between the Juden. Und wade nicht keines Nasses von einer von anderen Juden, certainly not supremacy of one Yid over other Juden. Was das meint lefi datoi, as bei Juden sollen sein Achdus. This in Korach's mind was Achdus. Korach wanted unity through equality. That everybody should be the same, nobody should be different than the other person, and certainly nobody should be raised up higher, seen to have greater authority than another person. Zokta B'Teira comes Teira and tells us, this claim, this argument, and this conduct of Korach is garder heipech von Achdus, is actually the polar opposite of unity. It's actually machlekes. When you claim that everyone should be equal, you're actually creating machlekes, you're creating division or divisiveness. And the Targum touched up vayikach Korach v'ispeleg. On the words vayikach Korach, the first words of the parsha, Korach took. What did he take? So Rashi says he took people with words. What does the Targum say? V'ispeleg. He divided. Biz as is vert klolos inyan machlekes until Korach becomes the epitome of machlekes, as it says in the Mishnah, Kol HaMachzik b'machlekes over belav. Anybody that holds onto a machlekes is actually over a lav. He actually transgresses a leisasa, which says in our parsha, you should not be like Korach and his congregation and his people. So, what does that mean? That means, what does Korach define? Machlekes. You should not be machzik b'machlekes. You shouldn't be like Korach. Korach becomes the epitome of machlekes. So not only did his argument for Achdus not work, his argument actually makes him into the epitome of Machlekes. Wie kommt es, als sein Monnen, the meaning von Achdus zwischen den Machlekes? How does Korach's desire for Achdus become Machlekes? Una Machlekes nazaif and Garua, and such a terrible version of Machlekes, because jeder Machlekes was can sein bei Yidden, is verbunden mit Machlekes Korach, to the point that any Machlekes that exists amongst Yidden could be connected with Machlekes Korach. Say an argument, this is like Korach v'chadasei. So Korach started out seemingly with a good intention. He wanted to create Achdus, unity by Yidden, but somehow, by doing so, he created the concept of machlekes, that he becomes the reference point for machlekes throughout the ages. So in Sif Hey is going to explain the concept that the Eibishter created everything in this world with a definition, with a task, and confusing that, conflating that, where you mix up the different creations of Hashem and the different tasks that they have, is actually the creation of chaos, not the creation of unity. The answer, the explanation of this is actually hinted in the answer of Moshe Rabbeinu. Boiker v'yoida Hashem. Wie das wird auch geteilt in Medrash und Rashi brings this up in Pirush Shel Torah, as Medrash explains this and Rashi brings it in his Pirush. Omer lehem Moshe says to the Yidden, to Korach, Gvul leis chalech HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Elamei, the Eibishter created the world with boundaries. Yechelin atem la'adav yem b'layla. Can you mix day and night? Zeu shamar HaKosov b'tchila v'hi erev v'hi veker v'yavdil l'kim erev v'nacheshach. Right in the beginning, the Torah tells us there was erev, there was beker, and the Eibishter separated between day and night, between light and dark. That's how you have a day. You have to have Eir and you have to have Cheshach. So too, the Eibishter separated the Yidden from the nations. And so too, the Eibishter separated Aaron from the rest of the Yidden. Like the Pasuk says, that Aaron was separated, was distinguished to be sanctified in the Holy of Holies, in the holiest level. Just like you can't stop, just like you can't hold back this separation of day and night, day is day, night is night, so too you cannot stop the separation of Aaron and the rest of the Yidden. So this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was telling the Yidden. The Eibishter created the world with definitions, with parameters, and everything has its defining factors. Day is day, night is night, light and dark. Let's understand this a little bit deeper. Being that the world was created with 10 utterances, the Eibishter could have created the world with one mimer, with one utterance, but the Eibishter didn't do that. The Eibishter created the world with 10 utterances. Therefore, the world was created in a way that there are definitions, there are boundaries. Had the world been created with one mimer, that would have created one equal bria. Everything would have been the same. It would have come from one mimer. So everything would have been exactly the same. But once the Eibishter created the world by Saram Amaris, he did so in order to create the world with different levels and different definitions. That within creation there is a hierarchy of levels. And every single creation has its boundaries, has its parameters with which it distinguishes itself from a different creation. Punkt wie sein in die Gvulis in die Zmanen von Erev Beker. As jedes man hat sich sein in die Betafkide davke. Using the example of Moshe Rabbeinu Beker, where there's day, there's night, and there's morning. Just like the Eibishter created a difference between day and night, that each one has its own time and each one has its own task. Und wenn jeder Basunder fühlt sein Tafkid later Akbala von sein Zman, wird von sei beide ayom echad, and when each of the two, the day does its job and the night does its job, that creates a day, a one day, a day, a oneness. The same thing is with regard to the task and role of every creation. Tachlis u'shleimus habriya is durch dem was jeder Nivra führt durch sein Tafkid, zu dem welchen ist beschaffen geworden, in sein bestimmter Agdara v'Agbala. That the ultimate completion and perfection of creation is when each and every creation fulfills its task for which it was created within the parameters and the definition that it was created. And if a creation does not follow through fulfilling its task according to its parameters and definitions, and rather does the task that was designated for a different creation, is there a bilbul in the Sidrei Bereshis. This causes chaos, confusion in the order of creation, because the whole way the world works is when each creation does its role, does its specific task. So we are establishing, we didn't go back to Korach yet, because we have to understand this a little bit better and deeper still, but we're establishing a very, very important foundation. And that is that the Eibishter created the world, even though the Eibishter is one, the Eibishter is Tachlis HaAchdus, but when it comes down into Bria, into creation, the Eibishter created the world with his chalkus, with various differences, differentiations, different levels. However you want to touch it, you look at the world around you, everything is different. Every single thing that the Eibishter created is different, and it was created in a specific way by the Eibishter to be able to fulfill its role and its task in creation. And everything is created for a reason, and was given the koiches that it needs to fulfill that which it needs to do. In Sivav, he's going to continue on this theme, and he's going to say not just the physical creation, but also the holiness within creation. Oh, he's going to call it the Oirah Kedusha, the light of transcendence that's really higher than this world, but that came down into this world to give this world holiness. There's going to be different levels of Kedusha, and he's going to break it down into the three categories of Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. In Kabbalah uses the Rashi Tevis Oshan, the word Oshan, which means the smoke of the Keteris. Olam, Shana, Nefesh. Olam is space, Shana is time, and Nefesh is people, humanity. In each of these three things, we see that there's a differentiation and a hierarchy of different levels of Kedusha, of holiness. Just like there's these differences and parameters within creation itself, the creations themselves, there also is going to be differentiations and distinctions within the light of Kedusha that descends into creation. This transcendent light that the Eibishter brought down into creation. That there's different levels in the levels of Kedusha, and in each of the three levels, Elam, Shana, Nefesh, which is hinted in the Rashi Tevis Asham. And let's do one thing at a time. Sidadi is Chalkus and Elam. In Makim, in Elam refers to space. There is a difference in the holiness of space. The Mishnah tells us that in Eretz Yisrael there was 10 different levels of holiness. You have Eretz Yisrael, you have Yerushalayim, you have the Beis HaMikdash, you have the Harabayis, you have the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's 10 different levels and there's halachic ramifications to this. The Rambam brings each level of Kedusha actually has a relevance in halacha. So you see that in space there's different levels of Kedusha. Al derech zaydayin shana, zman. Similarly, when it comes to time, you look through the year. The Yemei Sachel, you have weekdays. Yom Tiv, then you have days of Yom Tiv, which are holier than the weekdays. Shabbos, which is holier than Yom Tiv. Shabbos, Shabbos, Yom Kippurim, the holy of holiest day, which is Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day. So you have, again, also when you look at the holiness of time, there's different levels within time. Similarly, if you look at the neshama, the soul of humanity, in neshamas Yisrael, the chalukah klal is fun ama to lisai. First of all, you have the general division of a threefold nation. Keyanim levim Yisraelim. Urin Keyanim gufa Keyan hedyet bizder hechste daga from Keyan gadol. And in Keyan itself, there's various different levels. The lowest of the levels would be Keyan hedyet. The highest of the levels would be Keyan gadol, and there's a few levels in between. So you have Yisraelim, Leviim, Kayanim, and within Kayanim you have a bunch of different levels. Then you have the Chalukah from the Tzen Sugim by Yidden, Rashechem, Shavtechem, Escheta, Vitzecha, and Shevimecha. In Yidden itself, without going into Kayanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, you have the 10 levels that start from the highest, Rashechem, Shavtechem, until the wood choppers and the water carriers. Bis to Shishim Ribu. Then you have 600,000 levels, because we know that you have 600,000 Neshamas Klaliyos, and from general Neshamas, and from them come many more neshamas. Each of the neshamas that come from their original source is going to be in its own parameters based on the source neshama that it comes from, which is 600,000 different levels. So we see also in Nefesh that there's various different levels of Kedusha. Und geschehen, wie das ist in den Nivroim Atzma. As the Anhoga, just like we said in Seif Hey, when it comes to the creations of Hashem, The proper approach is that they should not change their task, their role. As yet, the nivra soll durchführen sein bestimmten Tafkid, that every creation should fulfill its designated specific task. Und nicht im Tafkid von einer zweiten nivra, and not the task of a different creation. But das bringt der Matzah von Shalom in der Bria. This brings peace and normalcy into creation. Und wie das ist in der Anhage von Welt, here he brings an example, a very practical example, how the world runs. Kipsuta, as Shalom and Achdus herrscht, dann, wenn einer ist nicht massig will. When can you have peace? When one person does not encroach on the other person. A person can't say, oh, we're both creations of Hashem, so your field is my field. Or I want to move the line of my field to over here because we're both children of Hashem. You have to respect the property and the boundaries of each person. You can't just go to war with the other person and take what belongs to that person for yourself because everybody is equal. Which is a very practical point. That the only way to have peace in the world is not when we share the wealth, as the expression goes, but when we recognize each person's accomplishments, each person's ownership and possession of what they have. Similarly, we said in Sifei that the Nivroim, when they have a task in creation, they have to do their task and they can't do someone else's task. And now we can, and the same thing is in these levels of Kedusha that we were just talking about in Elam Shana Nefesh. Shalom is durch dem, was is nicht talking asagas gvulvis nagdus von ein madrege kegen atzveter. The way you have Shalom is not by encroaching or by competing with one level over the other level. To say, oh, this level of Kedusha is better than this level, or I want to have Shabbos a whole week, etc. In Elam Shana Nefesh, no jeder gefindt sich in Gvul und in the Kedusha of Shabbos is on Shabbos, the Kedusha of Yom Tov is on Yom Tov, the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash is in the Beis HaMikdash, and the Kedusha of Yisrael is in the Kedusha of Yisrael. And a Kohen is a Kohen, and a Levi is a Levi, and Yisrael is a Yisrael. And to say, oh, I want to be a Kohen, or whatever it is, that does not create Shalom. So we've established the foundation. Sift Hey and Vav established the foundation that every nivra was created with a specific definition according to the task that is demanded of it, and it has to fulfill its task and not someone else's task. Similarly, in the Kedusha in the world, both in the areas of Elam, Shana, and Nefesh, the Eibishter created the world with various different levels of Kedusha, and the way to keep the Shalom in the world, and the way to keep Seder in the world, is when each level of Kedusha is respected and is fulfilled in its right time, in its right space, in its right person, according to the Kedusha that it was given. In Siv Zayin, he's going to say that truly we didn't get there yet, because when everyone's doing their own job, their own task, their own role, there'll be no fights, which is a very a lofty level to have reached. But the higher level than that is when the various different levels, while retaining their own definition, complement or help the other one. When you have an interaction between the levels, not a replacement where one is doing the other person's job, but when one is helping the other to do its job, that is true Shalom. That's what he's going to say in Sif Zayin and Ches. Aber das ist noch nicht der Matze von Emes und Shalom. We haven't yet reached true peace. But Rabbi Baldas, jeder Darge ist angeteilt für sich, gefindt sich in ihr Welt, since every level is separated to itself, it finds itself in its own world. It's not connected to the next one. It's just nifrodim, they are separated. You can use the term shalom because they're not battling one against the other. But it's not shalom, but it's not true peace. And shalom, as in completion or perfection, this isn't perfect achdus. Amitis inyan shalom is when es is da hashpa v'hashlome von ein darke zum zweiten, when there is an influence and a complementing one to the next level. Zusammen damit, was jeder Madrege hat in bestimmten Inyan, together with the fact that every single level has its own designated parameters, is that the ashpa mizuluzu. There is also an influence one to the other. Al derech the karazelza, like we say, the karazelza, one malach calls to the other, and the targum teaches umekablin dein min dein, that they receive one from the other. They receive from each other. Other which this would be side to side. This would be horizontal. Or from a higher level to a lower level on a vertical path, where a higher level gives or complements or influences the lower level. And he gives us a couple of examples. The Beis Hamikdash was obviously on a higher level than the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is not the Beis Hamikdash, and the Beis Hamikdash is not the rest of the world, but light would emanate from the Beis Hamikdash to the rest of the world. So there was a certain kedusha that was being given to the rest of the world from the Beis Hamikdash without changing the parameters. The Beis Hamikdash is the Beis Hamikdash, the rest of the world is the rest of the world, but there was an oir that went from the Beis Hamikdash to the rest of the world. When Azayich the Ashpah from Shabbos in the Sheisus Me'achel, or Shabbos says, my name is Baruch and Kulu Yom, and there's something that Shabbos gives to the rest of the week. So again, Shabbos is Shabbos, the week is the week, but Shabbos can give something to the rest of the week. Or the Ashpah, as their Kohen Gadol is Mamshech L'Bnei Yisrael, Birchas Kohanim and Azayvaita, the things that the Kohen Gadol does for the Yidden, or Birchas Kohanim in general, where the Kohanim bench the Yidden, they give them a bracha, they give them something. So although the Kohen is not turning the Yisrael into a Kohen, but it's not changing their parameters, but he's giving him a bracha, he's giving him a Teisus Kedusha from the Kohen to the Yisrael. The Alderech says Eich in the brackets here is going to go the other way, that the lower level, in this case, that the Yidden, the people, are able to be Moisef Kedusha in some of these other things in Olam Shana and Nefesh. They're Mishkan Beis Hamikdash. So here it's going in the previous paragraph he spoke about within Olam Shana and Nefesh, higher level to the lower level. In the brackets he speaks about from the Yidden, from people to be Moisef Kedusha in Olam Shana and Nefesh. The Mishkan Beis Hamikdash is Melachatchila Nivnei Gevarim for Nidvas Kalech Echad Miyisrael. The whole Mishkan, the whole Beis Hamikdash, which is creating this kedusha in the world, the higher level of kedushas, was created from the donations of the Yidden. Azay zegt die Amshachas HaKedusha in Mishkan u Beis Hamikdash verbunden mit die Karbonis, was die Yidden seine Makdish und Mak und bringen in Mishkan Hamikdash. And the bringing down the kedusha Reach Necheach LaHashem is through the Karbonis. Who brought the Karbonis? The Yidden donated and brought the Karbonis in the Beis Hamikdash and in the Mishkan. Similarly, you will find in the concept of time, not only the holiness of Yom Tiv is connected with and therefore according to the level of the Aveda of the Yid, because the Yidden are the ones who are Mekadesh this man, they sanctify the time. This is referring to the fact that Yom Tiv is based on Rosh Chodesh. When do we have a Yom Tiv? When Bezdin designated Rosh Chodesh, and this is done by the Yidden through seeing the Levana and coming to Beis Hamikdash, to coming to Bezdin, and Bezdin being Mekadesh the Chodesh. Through that, they were able to have Yom Tov. So, unlike Shabbos, which is Mekadesh V'Kaima, it's every seventh day since the beginning of creation. We have no part in making this specific day into Shabbos. This was done by the Eibishter. Yom Tov is dependent on the Avodah of the Yidden. So you can say, look, we're the one who take this Tuesday and make this day holy by being Mekadesh the Chodesh. And it turned out that Yom Aleph, the Chag HaSukkos, is Tuesday, and now regular Tuesday became a Yom Tov. This was done through Yidden. So he says, not only that, not only Yom Tov, which is sanctified by the Yidden, not Eich Ben Egeh Shabbos, Zok Ben Eich Dem Klal, even in regards to Shabbos, which Shabbos, the day of Shabbos, is chosen by Hashem. But nevertheless, there's a rule: Misha Tarach be'erev Shabbos yochel b'Shabbos. That one who toils on erev Shabbos will eat on Shabbos, which does not mean just that if you cook your cholent on Friday, you'll be able to have a cholent on Shabbos. But the Pirush HaPnimi in them is the deeper understanding of this is as the Kedusha Shabbos by Eden is mered. Eib zayin tirche und aveda in the sechs Wochen the Ketag is mered. That the Kedusha of a Yid's Shabbos could be higher if the investment that he invests during the 6 days of the week is higher. If a person does his Aveda properly during the 6 days of the week, then when he comes to Shabbos, Misha Torach be'erev Shabbos, Yechol b'Shabbos, and the Kedusha of his Shabbos is a higher Kedusha, which means that the Yidden have the power to be Moisef Kedusha in Shabbos, U b'Nefesh. And again, in the third level of Nefesh, the Gemara is up when Negei HaKoyin v'Kidashtoi. The Gemara says, v'Kidashtoi, you should make him holy. L'chol davar shebekdusha lefteiach rishon, that a kohen should be given to begin when it comes to a davar shebekdusha. Ulevarech rishon, to bench first. The little mana yafa rishon, and to receive the first portion, to receive the first portion, best portion. So, and this is why the kohen gets the first aliyah, etc., etc. That's why we give a kohen to do a birchas hamazon, because it says v'kidashtoi. We have a mitzvah to be mekadosh the kohen by giving him these honors. But if you look at the word v'kidashtoi, it doesn't say you should honor him. It says you should make him holy. As mis meisif in the kedusha from kohen durch dem Yisrael, that we're adding in the kedusha, it implies that this is not an inyan from kavod mishum darchei shalom. It's not just that we're honoring him with these honors, or we want to keep the peace, so we do this. It's actually a conduct, an act that actually increases the kedusha of the kohen. So we are able, by honoring the kohen properly, we are able to actually make him more holy. So we see that there is an interchange of an interaction rather between the different levels. That either mekabel and day mindain, you could share different things one from the other, or the higher level could add holiness to the lower level, or the lower level could add holiness to the higher level. But this only works when you have the proper separation and the proper distinction between the levels. And then everyone could influence or could give to the other. And this is how you reach the highest level of shalom. To the ultimate perfection and completion of all of the levels together. As the Alter Rebbe explains with regards to Klal Yisrael, to Yidden, that they all are dependent one on another. And all Yidden are one organic whole, one figure. Just like you look at the limbs of a person, as every limb in the person's body has a specific quality and a specific advantage that is necessary and brings help to all the other limbs. Similarly, it's in the we can apply this to Yidden when in Lashon from Alter Rebbe, as the Alter Rebbe says explicitly, like a human being that has head and feet, even though the feet are the lowest. Are the lowest level and the lowest in the figure, and the head is the highest and the topmost of the person. But on a certain level, there's an advantage to the feet. The head needs the feet to bring him places. The head can't walk without them. Also, the feet support the body and the head. When there's an illness in the head, they can let out blood, which was how they would do healing in those days. There would be bloodletting. So you let the blood out, you draw the blood in the feet, the nirpa, and this heals him, and he receives his vitality back in the head. There's no completion to the head without the feet. So too all Yidden are one whole person. Meaning to say that even though you have higher levels and lower levels within Yidden, but they are all interdependent. The Al Derech Zeh doesn't begin as Elam, as the Shleimus from the Hechter Madrege from the Esek Kedushas, even Esek Kedushas saying, then is ein da alle Esek Kedushas. When can you say that that this is the 10th level? If you have a 9th and an 8th and a 7th and so on and so forth, then you can say this is the 10th level of Kedusha. So if you want to have a hierarchy of 10 levels of Kedusha, you have to have each of the 10 levels in order to have the highest level. So again, in a certain sense, they are interdependent one on another. The Ganzkeit und Shleimus Inyan Hashana, the completion of the year, is Venesain in Nir Dali Mesachel, Shabbos and Yom Tevim. When you have the whole year, when you have the weekdays, if the whole year was Shabbos, that wouldn't be a perfect year, because it would just be Shabbos. When you have the weekday, and you have Yom Tov and Shabbos. So that means that even though the weekday is a lower level day than a Shabbos, but the weekdays make that Shabbos should be holy and should be part of the year. As you see this physically, Vashana is miloshen shinui. The word shana comes from the word shinui, changes because of the changes of the season. Unsheni, shana also comes from the word a second round. He references the Even Ezra. The Even Ezra says that the true meaning of Shana is the solar year, not the lunar year, because it's made up of 4 seasons. And the reason, and when do you reach a complete year? When you start a second year. When you've gone through all 4 seasons and now you go to the second year, that means you have a complete year. And it says that's why a year is called Shana, because it's made up, it's completed when it reaches the second year. So what makes up a year? When you have all the different seasons and all the different differences that are dependent on the seasons. And so too, when you have the Kedusha of the year, what makes up a year? When you have in it Yemei Sachayil, weekdays, when you have in it Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Yom Kippur, that makes a year. So the idea is that when they complement another, when they're all there for each other, that's what makes up the ultimate Achdus. As in dem Inyan HaShalom v'Achdus, wie von alle Pratim, werden zunächst gestellt ein ganze Metzius. So if this is how you're making Achdus, when you have all the various different levels and details that are creating one organic whole, seine Negeya Davke, then it's so relevant that each level, each unit should be recognized with its own parameters, with its own characteristics, with its own definition. Warum ist Achdus als Metzius Achas Shlema, Sayin Elam, Sayin Shana, Sayin Nefesh, schafft sich Davke mit Tzad Zeh des Chalkuts, als besondere Pratim. Because now we understand that what we're trying to do here, if you want to have a year, you want to have a complete year, you have to have all the different levels that come together to make a year. So therefore, first you have to recognize their differences. Then, only then could you bring them together to create the whole. Because the whole unity is only because of their differences. Not because of their common theme. Wie man sagt das in Guf Adam. Als wenn man sagen, dass es ein ganz schlimmes dicke Guf, darf wenn hatten sich alle Chiluken von neus Guf Regel, bis zu der Mache von Moshe sagt, dem Schönen. When do you have a completely healthy body? When you have 365 different sinews and 248 different limbs that are all brought together into one body. So in Siv Zayin and Ches, he took the differences that we spoke about in Sifei and Vav, that the Eibusher created every nivra with its own unique definition and parameters, and said when you take all these differences and you bring them together so that they can complement each other, then you have the perfect Achdus. But this is only after you recognize their differences. Only then can they complement each other and create a Metzius Achas Shlema, one complete entity made up of a bunch of different details that are unique and different in their definitions. Sif Tess is going to say that we're still not there yet. In other words, even though this is in the world that we know it, there is this is Achdus, when every single a different level is brought together into one. In Sif Tess is going to say that Fort, after all, this is still within the confines of creation. In Bria, Basara Amaras Nivra Ha'elam. So therefore, there's a Yischalkus, there's a hierarchy of levels, and therefore, the Achdus is when all the levels complement one another. He's going to say that before you get into creation, higher than creation, then you have the Achdus of the Eibusher that's L'mayla Meis Chalkus. There is no differences, no distinctions. And that is the ultimate Achdus. The later is going to say that is for the time of Mashiach. Der Inyan for Shalom and Achdus in the drei Beginnes Anal is nor b'shayches to der Bria, Keil El Misal Yenim. This is all relevant within creation, including the creation of the higher world. We're not just talking about Elam Hazah Gashmi. Anything that is part of Bria, of creation, is going to be included in this idea that Achdus is when you recognize the specific definitions of each creation, and then they complement one another. Since the world was created with 10 utterances, therefore the creation, the world is put together from many different levels. Is echter Kedusha and Elam Shana Nefesh. Das heißt, wie wird nimshach in Zman und Makim. Wir seien in Gather von Chalkos v'Shinuyim. So therefore, also the Kedusha, which we spoke about in Sivav, the transcendent light, which comes down into this world, into Zman and into Makim, which by definition are made up of different levels. Today is different than yesterday, and different than tomorrow, and so on and so forth, as we discussed. So this Eirag Dusha is ausgestellt in der Chalkas Nesek Dushas. It is established. It is designated in 10 different levels of holiness. Esser Madreges v'chulu. Welche stellen zusammen ein Schleimus der Geninien, die Kedusha von der Eibishter in der Welt, which together express the oneness of Hashem in the world. But again, this is all within creation. But this transcendent light, in it of itself, not as it is enclosed within creation. And certainly if you look at the source of the Eirag Dusha, the Mailo Bizin Atzmusa Yisbarach into the core of Hashem, versus Muvshit von Yeder Geder V'Ter, which is removed from any type of definition, any type of parameter, is dort nit shaykh the ganze Geder for Shalom v'Sachtos. The whole concept of peace, of oneness, doesn't exist. The Eibishter Baruch Hu is Achtos Abshuta. The Eibishter is the total oneness. So we have to realize that all of this discussion about Hischalkus and Achdus only fits into Bria, where there is a Hischalkus. There is a place. I don't know if you can't call it a place. There is a level that is beyond creation, and in that level there's no concept b'chlal of hischalkus, and therefore there's no concept of shalom and achdus. There is achdus abshuta, and that's it. And he's going to say now that we actually see this trickle down into creation. This achdus can also have an impact in this world, in the levels of Eilu Shana and Nefesh. For example, in Kedesh HaKadoshim Mokim Ha'oren Einim Min Amida, as Makim Gufa is L'mayla Min HaMakim. As we know this concept, that though one would measure from wall to wall 10 amas, nevertheless, when you measured from the wall to the Aron, from the wall to the Aron on the other side, you would measure 5 and 5. And though you would measure the Aron the 2.5 amas, nevertheless, when you measured from wall to wall, it was as if it wasn't there. It's something that is inexplicable in physical terms. It's impossible to explain. But the reality was that there was space. There was something higher than space in space. But thus is which has no physical explanation, even no spiritual explanation. It is only something that comes all the way from Atzmos. So even though Atzmos is Lamaila from this higher than this world, nevertheless it impacted this world in this space that Makim Ha'oren Einim Min Amida. In Shana, Yom Kippurim versus Achas B'Shana. In Shana, there is a concept where Yom Kippur is this one time a year, is the Achas of Hashem within Shana. When Nefesh is the Blaze Kein Gadol Echad. The same thing as that there could only be one Kein Gadol. Where you see the idea that within Nefesh, there is one person, so to speak, that has this higher Kedusha that doesn't fit into this world. So when durch der Knisse von Kein Gadol, B'Yom Kippurim, in Kedesh HaKadoshim, so when the Kein Gadol would go into the Kedesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur, which is the oneness in Olam, in Shana and in Nefesh, is there mamshich dem inyan hashalom v'shleimus, so he could draw down this peace and this completion, this perfection. In this once a year, one person in the whole world, and one time and one place in the whole world, he's able to draw down this holy Achdus Abshuta, that it should impact Yidden down here in their specific levels. So what he's pointing out, what he's bringing out in Sif Tes, is that even though there is, we elaborated, Hey Vav Zayin and Ches, that in this world there is a ribuya ischalkus, because basara mamoris nivra olam, and true shalom ve'isachdus is when the various different levels recognize their differences and then complement or influence or help the other levels. You have to remember that there is a level that's higher than bria, which is achdus hapshuta. Now we're going to go back to Korach. Lei dem wird man verstehen, was Chazal sagen, Korach shepike choya mara lishtuzeh. Chazal say Korach was such a wise person, such an intelligent person. How did he fall to such a silliness, such a folly? Was von Lashon shepike choya. The fact that they say that he was wise, or in Chachas mod wegen sein Pikris bis nicht gelernt und nicht gehört, although we've never yet learned or heard about Korach's intelligence, is mashma as von dem inyan gufa wesen as Pike Chaya. It's understood that it's from this very story that we understand that Korach was truly a wise individual. Nevertheless, we ask, how did he fall? How did he come to such a folly? As in der Pikris is that within his wisdom, within his intelligence, there was also a blended in an element of shtus, of folly. The Asbara in them, and here's the explanation. The Geder HaPikchus VaChacham is, what does it mean to be wise or intelligent? He who is wise, he who sees what is going to be born. Which literally it means who can expect the future, who can see, what's going to happen if you do this and this, something's going to happen. But Chassidus explains what does mean Reya Saneilet as a zet nit nur demand plekten tail von azach. That a wise person doesn't just see the external revealed aspect of something, nur echt den behalten pnimi ist der Ketechel von der Zach, was wenn es galer später. A person could see the deeper hidden content of something which may not be revealed until later on. A regular person, you see the cover of a book, and you see the cover. A chacham doesn't judge the book by its cover. He sees that within the book there's depth. Within the story there's a behind the scenes, and ultimately that will come into the open. Now it may not be, chacham to realize that there's something that is going to be born. There's something that is going to come to the open that hasn't yet been seen. So the pikchus of Korach is that he saw something that was yet to be, something true and real, but it was yet to be. Das heißt, die Teine von Korach and Kikol Elo Kulam Kadeshim V'Seichem Hashem Umadua Tisnas V'Alkal Hashem. So now we're going to take Korach and we're going to put him on a pedestal. We're going to say Korach's argument that all the people are so holy and Hashem is amongst them. Why should these people be raised above them? As is Nitok in Art of his Chalkus by Eden. The Korach was claiming that there's no room for a differentiation, for distinction by Yidden. Everyone should be on the same level. Is mitzad zayin chachma u'pikchus. It actually came from his wisdom. He saw true achdus as it is in its source. He saw the oneness of Hashem, where you go higher than creation, and there's no distinctions, there's no different levels. There's just one achdus of Eibishter. Which will be revealed lost love. That when the Mashiach comes, this will be revealed in this world. And they won't have to teach one another because everyone's going to know me, which means there's no teacher, student, there's no different levels. Everyone is going to be on the level to know Hashem. So this was his bichus. This wasn't his intelligence. Korach saw the Achdus Apshuta, and he saw that this world is going to have it one day. And Korach said, "Let's do it now." But this was Korach's mistake. This true, clean, pure Achdus can only be either in its source, higher than creation, or lost in love. But here in this world, in the time before Mashiach comes, when we still have to work the world, is this approach, not only is it not an expression of unity and peace, it's the exact opposite, it's machlekes. Because in order for things to get done in this world, you have to recognize the differences. You have to recognize that some people are higher than other people. And some teach, and some learn, and some share. And that tapestry, that fusion is what creates shalom v'achdos, not the equality that Korach wanted to do. The bir b'zeh. Let's elaborate on this. Let's explain this. As the kedusha is ba'alamin gleich und der Farken echa Yisrael nit keken reingehen mit mikdash makos and kabanos und keteres. When you say that everyone is the same, everyone is holy, and therefore even a Yisrael and non-Koyin can go into the Beis Hamikdash and can bring karbanis. Is the baldos is nid zayin madrego nefan aveda, because since this is not his level and this is not the task that he was given in this world, vert von dem ve'ispeleg, this creates a division. And he explains, and it's very important to understand this. Der Nitzos Beire Eleki, was is da bei jeden Iden. Was mit Sadem ist euch mekabel die Ashpa von Gdushos Kein Gadol durch der Avede von Kein Gadol, wird nistalek lemaila. Every Yid has a Yechidische benefesh. A Nitzos Eleki. But he also has a Nitzos Beire. A spark of the Eibishter that's inside of them. So you have a person that has two Yechidas, let's say. Two Nitzutzos. Nitzutz Beira and Nitzutz Nivra. The Nitzutz Beira is what gives the person the spiritual hashbois that he needs. So when we said before that the Kohen Gadol is able to be mashpia, to give kedusha to Klal Yisrael, it comes through Nitzutz Beira. But when the person is a Yisrael, it's acting like a Kohen, then the Nitzutz Beira leaves and goes back upstairs, goes back to the spiritual worlds. But die Madrege Prates von dem Idin kann nicht vernehmen die Madrege Neilis von Kedusha. Because once you've lost your definition, once the person is not who you're supposed to be, the Nitzutz Beira doesn't know how to deal with it. So it leaves, it goes back up. Und sein Nitzutz Nivra Prati is Yered v'Nivra Lamato. And the Nitzutz Nivra goes down and it gets swallowed up in the physicality of the world. This is a very important point, so I'll just repeat it again. When there is a ve'ispelig, when the person is not doing his avodah, what happens is a division. What the division? That the Nitzutz Beira, the spark of creator that exists in the person, goes back to the creator, and the spark of creation that is in the person becomes swallowed up in the rest of the physicality of the person. And similarly, this happens on an overall level with Yidden. Then, when you don't have those who are supposed to rise up higher than the rest of the Yidden, as fell in the mechitzas amavdilis zwischen Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim, there's the separation between Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim is lacking. Und zwischen Kohen Gadol v'Shar Ha'am. Was dafke mitzad der mechitze v'hevdel is do yes the same as Hashem v'achtos as ein madrege is maspir zu der zweiter und durch dem seinen alle mishalim seinen alle mashlim dem tzir kaima von Klolos Yisrael the mechitza we just explained in the sikha at length that the mechitza, the separation between the Kohen Gadol and the rest of the Yidden, is what creates the ability for the Kohen Gadol to give to the Yid, because we know that he is the giver and they are the recipient, and therefore this is able to complete the Klolos Yisrael. But if you're lacking this mechitza, if you want to say that a Kohen Gadol is not a Kohen Gadol, chas v'shalom, and a Yid, it can also be a Kohen Gadol, dan der Pilug v'yischalkus zwischen Iden, then you create this divisiveness, the Aliyah v'yistalkus von the Elyenin Sheba'am, und die Ride von the Tachtenin Sheba'am. Those that are on the higher level go higher up, excuse me, and those who are on the lower level go lower down. So in the Yid himself, the Nitzutz Beira goes up, the Nitzutz Nivra is Nivla, gets swallowed up in the Gashmis of the person. In Yidden, the higher Yidden, the higher up Yidden, the Kohanim G'dolim, etc., they raise themselves up and removed from the people, and those who are the lower down of the people, they fall even lower. When they're meeting, Sif Yud Beis is going to explain to us the punishments now. It's almost self-understood, but the punishments of Sreifa and Belia based on all this. When the mitzvahs move on with the ancient from Sreifa and Belia, now we understand how the punishments of burning and of being swallowed up in the ground are actually measure for measure, are actually commensurate to the crime that was done. Commensurate to the crime of divisiveness, because these two things, Sreifa and Belia, burning and being swallowed up, express the separation that occurs, that there are those that go higher up and there are those that fall down. Durch Sreifa wird der Kiloyin v'istalkus von die Hachere und edlere Teilen von Davar HaNitzref. In the physical world, when you burn something, what happens is it consumes and raises up the more refined elements of the thing that's being burned, and what's left is the ash. You know, it says that everything has in it Eish Ruach Mayim and Offer. Everything that Hashem created has some has more Offer, some has more Ruach. when you take a piece of wood and you burn it, so the eish in it, the ruach in it, the mayim in it, all go and evaporate to above, and what's left is offer, the ash. That's what remains. So sreifa represents the consuming and the elevation of the more spiritual, more refined elements. Und durch Belia, weil jeder Gamer Chaim Sheila von den niedrigen Teilen, welche seinen nicht scheich sind, ist alle, wenn Nichel werden Lamaila, durch Sreifa. And Belia, being swallowed up in the ground, represents the lower elements that are too coarse to be elevated or consumed in the fire. They are swallowed up and become part of the physicality of the world. So we'll elaborate in a moment, but this explains that in Machloikis, two things happen. Two things happen. Number one, where the higher levels, one thing happens, divisiveness, the ispeleg. What it causes is two things: that the more refined levels should go up, that the more coarse levels should go down. It's exactly what happened in the punishments. There was Sreifa and there was Belia. There were the more refined elements were burned and consumed and went up to higher up. The more coarse elements were swallowed up in the physicality and the earthliness of the world. In the brackets he adds that it's actually consistent with who got which punishment. Das ist maßen bepashtos mit die chilukim in die einzelnen in anashim kipsutei, in the differences of the punishments and who received those punishments. Mit Sreifa seinen nenus gebaran die Reish nun nicht makrive akteres. Burning was the punishment for the 250 people which brought the akteres. Was they seinen given the CAA the kriye made anshe shem. They were people of stature, leaders of their tribes. Rosh Sanhedrin, the heads of Sanhedrin. They were very lofty people. So they received the loftier punishment, so to speak, that they were consumed and raised above. When the Einus from Blia is given Saviv Dasan Vaviram and Koladam Shalakirach, and the punishment of being swallowed up was Dasan and Aviram and the people that fit into that category, which even prior to this machlekes were low-level people. The Torah discusses various different chatoim of theirs, whether it was the fight in Mitzrayim or the stories with the Mon, etc., etc. And the Torah even calls them Rasha. The Torah refers to them as a Rishoyim. They were low-down people, and therefore they received the lower of the two punishments, Belia. High time is in them from Yardu Chaim Sheila Mudgish der Inyan Ablia. And this is why in the punishment of going down into the grave is the emphasis of Belia. Der mit wird euch gemeint der Nitzutz HaKedusha was is da in die Madreges HaTachtenim. Yardu Chaim doesn't just mean that they went down into the ground. It means that the spark of holiness that was in them was swallowed up into the ground. Because when you break down the barriers between the various different levels, then the nitzus of kedusha that's in the person becomes swallowed up in sha'oil, in the gimel klippus atmeis. Ki yodua b'negeh die nitzitzas of kefinnen sich in the klippus as the nitzitzas kedusha was von zei, was von zei seine mekrabel chayis the klippus atmeis and beginnes blia bohem. That the klippos they consume, and the way the expression is, they are swallowed up within them. That the nitzutzas of kedusha that are grabbed by the forces of klippa are swallowed up. So Yardu Chaim Sheila doesn't just mean they descended into the ground. It means that they were swallowed up in the ground. That the nitzutz of kedusha that's in them was swallowed up by the klippas. So now we have a whole new understanding of what was going on with the Sreifa and Belia. The whole issue of Korach was the Ispelik. Korach was trying to create Shalom v'Achdus, but instead he broke down the barriers between the various different levels, which creates a chaos in the world. And when it does that, it creates a division, that the higher levels go up, the lower levels go down. And therefore there was a einish of Sreifa, that the higher levels went up. There's an einish of Belia, that the lower levels went down into the earth, into Klippa. This, in Sif Yud Gimel, we're going to answer the question of Korach's punishment, that Korach had to experience both Sreifa and Belia. Korach says, "Eich movem was Alpiza is Eich movem was Zakt Medrash as Korach has nenes given with Beide Einshim." It's understood what the Medrash says, that Korach was punished with both punishments, mit Sreifa mit Belia. Warum? Zayin dik der Makar v'Sheiresh Machlekes. Since Korach was the root of the whole machlokes. Was hat allem in mefatig given. He convinced everyone to take this road. Der Fahrer hat eich sein einisch Keil given bei von Golui beide chalokim uksavis von dem Pirud Pilug. His punishment had to include both extremes of the separation and the divisiveness and the division. Und wenn wollte nennisch geworden, nur mit einer von sie, had he been punished with just one of the two, oder Sreife oder Belia, wollte gewend die Teine, wo Nitzel, hat Salas Chelek Ha'elyon, oder hat Salas Chelek Ha'tachten, wo der eine Shapirut hat und dann gericht. Then it would have been correct to use the words he was saved. Either his higher half was saved, that it didn't have to go up away from the lower half, or the lower half was saved, that it wasn't swallowed up in the earth. So now that we understand that what was happening with Sreifa and Blia wasn't just the fact that they were dying, but actually there was a spiritual component to this. So what was happening to Korach was he had to experience both. And if he didn't experience both, then he would be saved from whichever one he didn't experience. And therefore Korach had to experience both punishments. The higher level within Korach, his neshama got burnt. The guf kayam, but his guf, the lower level of his remained, was not burned. But then it rolled down into the place where everyone else was swallowed up, and it too was swallowed up, so that the lower half of him received the punishment of Belial. Now for a practical, very practical takeaway from this whole approach. The approach of Korach that wants to create equality through unity, through equality, and not recognize that diversity of creation is actually the ultimate way to reach unity. This is a lesson to all times, especially in our time. There are those who claim in order to create more peace and harmony, we should not be so specific about the separations that was the Eibishter eingestellt in Welt, which the Eibishter himself established in this world. For example, starting with the fact that they want to break down the barrier between males and females. Eidus beget v'kiddushin, for example, to say that women should be used as eidus, as witnesses in a get or in kiddushin, mitzarev zayin to a minyan as a weiter, or to include them in a minyan, etc. Proven schaffen an arvuvia in das ve'emunah zwischen iden and lahav l'umis ha'olam. Another example is to try to create confusion and conflation in faiths between the faith of Yiddishkeit, of our faith, and other nations. A pirze in der mechitza mavdela is another example. A pirze in der mechitza mavdela is when Yisrael amim hoyelisia, breaking down the barrier between Yidden and other nations. Durch the mazei gerufener gier shleik halacha, through what may be called gier, but it's shleik halacha v'chulu. All in the name of peace. We want to have peace, so let's do this. Let's take this away. Let's have more unity. Zetman from Maisa Korach Chayra. So we see from the story of Korach a clear lesson. As wenn men vil chas v'shalom mevatel zayin gvulis was chalak HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'olam. If you want to break down the boundaries that the Eibishter himself created in this world, is nesev ala iker. Adas heipech teiras Moshe v'ziyas teiras Hashem. Nechleku ala HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In addition to the most grievous of infractions, that this is going against the Torah of Moshe, which is the Torah of Hashem. They weren't just rebelling against Moshe, they were rebelling against Hashem. But in addition to that, Brenkman der mit nitkin shalom, nor farket pirud elavavis. This does not lead to peace. This leads to divisiveness. Zachin was be'etzem zayin ze aggetelt oder gar heipech einer von zweiten. Things that are by definition separated or even opposite one of another. Ken zwischen ze nit zayin kin chibur. You cannot connect them, nor seiden durch a mechitza was es mafsik zwischen sei. It's not saying that you can't have a connection between two things, but if they're different, then they need something. They need the mechitza to connect them. And he uses a fascinating example in the brackets here. When you want to use water and fire together, you want to cook a soup, so you need the fire, you need the water. Ken sein davke wenn es ist da hefsik. Can only work excuse me, if you have a separation of the pot. If you have the water in the pot, then the fire can heat up the pot, and the pot will heat up the water. Anders is nit nor nitokin to yelis from the chibur. If you don't have the pot, not only will the fire and water not be able to work together, nor the chibur break a bittel gamer from the tzvis von zweiten. Either the fire will consume the water, or the water will extinguish the fire. You cannot cook water directly on the fire without a pot. So in other words, if you want to bring two things together, they can work together. Two different things can complement one another, but only after you have the mechitza that recognizes their differences. When we sustain and strengthen the barriers and boundaries that the Eibishter created in His world, and each person fulfills their task for which they were created, this can create the peace. This can generate the peace. But as dar zayin zwischen die verschiedenen Sugim, which has to exist between the various different segments. Because that kind of peace, a peace that recognizes the barriers, that is a peace that's founded on Torah, and therefore, and Torah is a Torah of peace. So through this we're able to merit a time where there won't be war and there won't be jealousy or competition. As and the Mashiach is going to come, who's from the descendants of David and Shlomo, which Shlomo represents the peace that existed in his time. Even though Mashiach comes, there will be a distinction between Yidden and other nations. But the Eibishter will then be able to make the world that everyone will serve Hashem together. That everybody will join together to serve the Eibishter. So even though there will be differences, but we will reach the ultimate Achdus then, but only if now we are able to recognize the differences and have Achdus with the proper mechitzos, with the proper barriers and boundaries as Torah and as the Eibishter established. That leads to the ultimate Achdus. So the true unity is an outgrowth not of equality, but an outgrowth of diversity. When we recognize the differences amongst us, then we are able to complement one another and reach the ultimate Achdus, and that will bring Mashiach.